Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Deep Life. We've got Amanda Hess with us today, and Amanda is a neurodivergent woman who is a certified life and success coach. She specializes in guiding her fellow neurodivergent humans through the twists and turns of life. In a world that sometimes feels overwhelming, Amanda Hess coaching is the compass guiding neurodivergent women towards resilience, self-love, and a life that reflects their truest selves. Oh, which I just love. Amanda, welcome to the Deep Life podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you on and to talk. We've never had someone who is neurodivergent on the show. And from my understanding, you discovered this kind of in your adulthood. This wasn't something you grew up understanding or knowing. So I'd love to jump into that at some point. But before we do so, if you could just give us a little background on who Amanda Hess is and kind of what you did maybe prior to your coaching business.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, I'm a life coach. I've been a life coach now for 4 years. And I've been coaching women that I feel like in a lot of ways are just like me, that are struggling, that are having a hard time navigating life and all that it comes with, especially as we get older. And, for me, I think that the label of neurodivergent is something you can use or something that can really harm you. So you always want to be careful with labels, right? But for me, I think that it's just a place where I find it's a neutral space in that you can be neurodivergent and it means something and it doesn't mean something. So it really is just an opportunity for you to maybe look at the world differently. Prior to becoming a coach, I was a stylist or an image consultant, whatever you want to call it. I did that for a few years. And prior to that, I worked in direct sales a lot. So being a stay-at-home mom for a certain portion of that, I had, always had, I guess, an entrepreneurial spirit to an extent. So I've been working with people for forever, it seems. I came from a career in finance, believe it or not. And after having my kids, it just really wasn't a good fit. It just felt like so difficult for me to put all the pieces together. And so I tried a lot of things after I had my kids. I drove a school bus for a while. That was horrible. And with my son on board, just yeah, good God, so awful. And I've done all these different iterations, but when I found life coaching, I actually hired a marriage coach for myself. It was the first time that I'd ever hired a coach that wasn't a business coach. And she was the first person that ever told me, everything that you're experiencing is actually completely normal. It's not that abnormal. And there are things that we can do, like without changing who you are, to make your life work a lot better. And just that change for me was so instrumental. So once I had experienced that, I really wanted to offer that to other women that were like me. And so that's sort of the shortest version of the story that I can give with respect to, who I am and kind of where I came from and why I do what I do now. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love that. I think it's going to resonate with so many people, as I think the more guests we have on the show, similar stories are beginning to emerge that, you're in a world of either finance or corporate jobs working to the ground, and it's just not feeding our souls the truest essence of who we really are. And then we do go through these things that life beautifully presents to us to reframe our mindset, to observe and actually tap into our values and what happens. And I love that you went to a marriage coach, and then it probably was such a divine, union of that spark within you to then begin saying like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. How can I provide this to other people? I think that that's wonderful. So if you don't mind, give us a little bit of like a better understanding of how you feel and how the clients that you work with feel as being neurodivergent.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say everybody's experience is a little bit different.
Okay.
But what I will say is that I think the majority of people that are neurodivergent struggle with sensory processing. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of circumstantial things that are going on in your life. And to an extent, when we're younger, we start figuring out how to make that work. And sometimes we find healthy ways to make that work, and sometimes we don't, right? So for me, when I was younger, in order to be more socially palatable, I guess, I learned that, oh, well, I can drink and I'm more fun, right? I can drink and then people are more, it's just I'm a good time. And then I'm not so serious and it's not so hard for me. And I'm not freaking out all the time, although sometimes you're freaking out a lot more because you're drunk. But, you ultimately find this sort of like way to be in the world. So I really learned how to kind of not be myself to be more socially acceptable. And that's hard to do. It requires a lot of effort. And it also starts putting a wall up between you and other people where you feel not connected. And it almost is an experience of a performance. Like your life feels a lot like performing. And so every day is a performance. And then sometimes you just can't do the performance. Like you don't think about it in that way, but that is what it is like. And when you are around other people, when you're working at your job, you're just trying to perform and it feels like it's everything is for everyone but you. And then you come home and you sort of implode, right? And that was my life for a very long time. And that's what I see in a lot of my clients is they can't trust themselves to even know what they like. So, what I find, especially for women that are like moving into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that they don't know what they like anymore because they've spent their whole life deciding that what they need is not what they can focus on, right?
Mhm.
And so they have these sensory processing issues and they have a hard time connecting and they have reactions that don't make sense to other people and they find themselves either like totally losing it or completely not having any energy for anything or anybody and then they beat themselves up for it and the cycle just goes on and on and on to a point where you reach a tipping point, you reach a place, a breaking point, I guess is more like it, where things start to fall apart and you just no longer have the energy to put it back together anymore. And that's what I typically see is just a lack of knowing of yourself because you've been told and shown in so many ways that it is unacceptable. And so you try to hide that from the world and even from yourself. And then over time, it just gets too hard to manage.
Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. Yes. I feel like you beautifully articulated that. Thank you for breaking it down. And it resonates a lot with me. And I don't know, does it resonate
It
with you?
it does. It
From a
does
male
resonate with me
perspective,
too. Yeah.
obviously, is interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and kind of like what you pointed to earlier, the marriage counselor had pointed out, like these things are these things are normal. Like you're not the only one going through it, because I think so many of us, it feels like we're the only ones who struggle with any kind of problem, and then you look around and just assume everybody else is perfect in there because nobody's talking about it really. So you just assume, or you just look on social media, and it's like, oh well, their life seems perfect. Why is it so hard for me? So I think it's really cool to hear you talking about this and sharing that it is something that so many of us are going through.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is not, I don't feel like, when we use the term neurodivergent, I think we think of like certain diagnoses like being ADHD or being
Mhm.
having an ASD diagnosis, but like it's not really that. It's more of the way that I am doesn't really fit with the world and I can't seem to make my brain function the way the brain want that the world wants me to make it function. And now, yeah, there's this general sense, I think, especially like in North America in particular, but of course I've had clients in other places and it's it's just this constant feeling of I'm doing it wrong, I'm doing it wrong, I'm doing it wrong. And that's so hard on your self-esteem and you don't realize how much it's damaging you. It's like little tiny cuts over time. And yeah, then you start feeling ashamed of it, so you don't tell anybody about it and you just start retreating more and more and more. And it does feel like you're in a place where it's completely unsolvable. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're alone.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I absolutely. I think God, there's so many different
Yeah.
ways I want to go here because I love it. And I truly, what's coming up right now is I'm thinking that we're sentient beings. We
Mhm.
are here to feel. That means that we have senses and we diminish those senses so much, or I feel like, in my opinion, they're really taken for granted because we're never taught what it actually feels like to have feelings and emotions. We're not taught if sounds trigger us in any certain way. We're not taught how to actually like smell our food, or, I know stop and smell the rose is a very cliche, but when you actually can do that and you're present in the moment and truly understand that we are nature and that rose is a beautiful part of us and we get to experience that smell, and all of us smell differently, like when we can embrace that. And the feeling when our toes hit the sand on a beach or something, or the embrace of a hug. Like, I used to be someone who like was not a hugger. It gave me severe anxiety not to hug people, and I've dove in a little bit into this with like inner child work and familial as being like an analytical thing, but also it felt really scary to be touched and to touch another person. And all these things. I know it sounds kind of silly that we're not taught about them in school, but I feel like this is almost the birth and the evolution of like our actual human nature. And I hope that people, and it seems like what you're doing is like embracing it as a superpower and showing like, all right, like how can we use this? How can we use this to empower ourselves? And that's kind of where I'm leading with this, is a question like, how do you begin working with your clients? I know that you said they're all unique and individual, so whatever general terms would be appropriate here, but to really like understand, like, it's okay, like, let's use this to an advantage. Let's use this to kind of gather more into the truer nature of who you are, and like really tapping into maybe the sensory perception that can be overwhelming at first. So I'd love to understand kind of if there's do's and don'ts, or any type of modalities.
Yeah, I don't lean into a lot of hardcore modalities, that's for sure. I try to keep things really simple for my clients because I find that's what works best for me. And I find it easier for my clients. Like if you're trying to pull them through like a really complicated breathing technique or meditation, that can be great if you're in a really centered place and you're able to get yourself there. What I find is that the people that I work with and the world that we live in, I've had so many conversations with clients and other people about, the world that we live in now. The input we have is enormous. Like even if you think about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, like 30 years ago, there were no cell phones. Or maybe there was, maybe not 30, let's say 40. 40 years ago, there were no cell phones, right? 40 years ago, no cell phones. I don't think there was really cordless phones. Like, I think actually we were still like on cords.
Yeah.
And, there was no internet and you watched what was on TV or you didn't watch TV. And I didn't have cable when we moved to the country. So we got 4 channels and one of them didn't work very good. And, it was just a really different input. Like now, the life we live in, it's like we are inundated in our brain with sensory experience, right? Like all the time. And people don't sit in silence anymore, ever. And so you're always got a podcast in your ear or music in your ear. Like my kids drive me nuts because they like walk around with one headphone in with their head in their phone. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Stop it. Right? It's insane. And then they can't hear me because they're like noise canceling headphones. Like it's a whole other thing. But like seriously, I'm
We
like,
don't have kids,
hello.
but we know people who do and have the noise canceling headphones, and it's like it's hilarious. You can't hear anything.
If you were to like have speakers in my house, you would think I was unhinged because I'm like screaming all the time, but I'm trying to get people to hear me. But I do think that when you look at it from the standpoint of, I look back on my youth and I'm like, okay, definitely if I was to be diagnosed now, maybe ASD, right? Like, definitely if I would have sensory input that was overwhelming for me, I would explode. Like, I just had no ability to really handle it. And was that nature and nurture? Probably a little bit of both. But in the end, nowadays, like in the world we live in, I try to explain to my clients, like, it can seem like you're lazy and like, oh, I'm not even doing anything. I'm like, but you're doing something all the time. And to be able to slow down and use your senses, when I'm looking at sort of the techniques that I like to give my clients, there's really kind of 3 that I like to use. The first is to use your senses and to just start bringing in pleasurable sensory experiences. And to your point, like sound, touch, smell, taste, like all of your senses have you can just do little tiny ads to really help yourself regulate. You don't actually have to pull it all away. You don't have to stop working or, no longer go to your kid's football game or whatever, but you do need to start knowing how to take a breathing break in the middle of your day.
Mhm.
And your brain is really going to object to that and not want to do it. And it's going to tell you it's stupid and you're too busy and it's not going to do anything anyways. That's the lie, right? Is like, actually, this has a huge impact for you and it will settle you and ground you and it will allow you to have more emotional capacity. So, like, that's part of it, right? Then the other things that we talk about, I talk to my clients about when you're feeling an emotion and having an emotion scale, like, okay, you're feeling anxious. To me, anxiety, I always like to go a little deeper because I'm like, anxiety is fear. So, like, what are you afraid of? But in the end, it's like if you're feeling it at a 10 out of 10, you're never going to be able to have a logic argument with your brain when you're feeling anxiety at a 10
Mhm.
out of 10. You're going to have to tap into your senses in some way. And so I find movement is always very effective, like move the emotion through without trying to push it away, just being like, oh, this is here. This is what this feels like. I'm not going to die. I can keep going. I can just move this through and it will go away on its own. No feeling lasts forever, right? And then lastly, of course, looking at the quality of your thinking. But when you're looking at the quality of your thinking, you do need to be in like an emotional midpoint. You can't be feeling emotion at a 10 or a 9 or even an 8 because your logical brain has no power there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, like I'm always looking at if you really want to have emotional control, which is what people really are looking for, it has to do with having a better understanding of the emotion that you have. And like you say, like tapping into your senses and knowing yourself. Like I was just having a conversation with a girlfriend yesterday. We went for dinner and we were just talking about how our husbands love physical touch. Like that's their thing. But like for us, it's neither of our thing. And so it's like,
Mhm.
it's very overwhelming for me, touch. And so I like not always ready for it. And it feels like an assault sometimes. And I'm like, why are you touching me right now? But then my husband will like hug me and flop my arms around him and be like, this is hugging. Like you're supposed to hug back.
Dan can
Yeah,
probably attest to
that's
that.
very, that also, yeah, definitely resonates. I'm actually curious along the lines of hugging, as you've kind of become more emotionally balanced and had more kind of understanding and control of your emotions, has it become easier for you to have physical touch and to hug, or is it still like something that's just you think will always be like that?
I think when I feel regulated, it's great.
Mm.
When I feel dysregulated, it's not great.
Okay, gotcha. That
But
makes
if I can like get myself to breathe through it, it feels good. It's just that it's at the beginning. It's so wild. Like at the beginning, it just feels like one more thing that got added to the pile.
hmm
That and to for women, like I don't know. I think sometimes for us, it's like you always feel like you're having to do something for somebody. And it's like, I don't want to do another thing for another person. So sometimes you don't receive a hug as being for you. You think of it
Mm.
as being for the other person. And so I think even just having that thought, like this hug could be for me, like this might be something that might make me feel really good if I leaned into it and just let the experience wash over me. But it's that almost that slowing down and tapping into your senses, sort of like slowing down and tapping into your emotions, right? Because like when you're in an emotional frenzy, all you want to do is do things or think about things. That's all you
hmm
want to do. And when it's like, oh, even when I say to my clients, they're so triggered sometimes, right? When I'm like, we need to slow it down. And you can just tell they want to kind of punch me in the face when like we're telling them to do this, right? They're like, no, tell me how to feel better. And I'm like, this is how you're going to feel better.
Yes.
Yep.
So sometimes with a hug, it's like a hug will make you feel better, but
Mm.
it requires you to drop out of that cerebral space and into that feeling space. And I think it's sometimes hard to do that when you're really triggered.
Mm.
Uh,
That's really interesting.
It is, and it gives so much more context to it. It goes so deep at a level of feeling, as opposed to the analytical mind. I think
Yeah.
it's beautiful and it's very helpful to
Yeah. I want to like
understand.
stay on hugs for a little bit because there's something really, really, I love hugs. No, I think there's
So
something
does my
really
husband.
yeah. Yeah. We'll just go, I'll give him some hugs and we'll be
Yeah,
fine.
you guys can
But,
just hug together. It's fine.
but like, there's something really interesting about it that I assume is like an innate human quality that when we're hugging, we're exchanging information.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much from an energetic standpoint that's being exchanged, where like your higher self is getting to know more about the higher self of the other person, or like with your energy body, whatever. And your body's understanding, okay, this person is stressed. Do I need to be stressed about this environment? Or this person feels safe. I can relax here. But then there's also an exchange of actual like protons and electrons, like subatomic elements are being passed from person to person. Then at a little higher of a scale, the microbiome, like our skin microbiome, is touching and sharing information. So we're learning so much about our environment, about the people that are with us. And I don't know, I just think there's something really interesting about it, where I don't know how we ended up as humans hugging each other, but
Yeah.
that both sides benefit from a hug.
Yeah.
But then there's like what you said, where there's something really interesting, I think, about if you're too much in your head, you're not thinking about, oh, my body is actually benefiting from this. You're just thinking about all the other things that are going around in your head.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know if there's a question here. It just, as you were talking, I was thinking all these thoughts where like, there really is something interesting from evolutionary standpoint of the hug, and why I would like why do we hug each other. So I think there's something just really cool there that I was thinking about. And then also, like, I think it is really interesting where if you're not able to regulate your nervous system, you're not able to get those innate benefits that come with something that we do primally or whatever. I don't know, I just think there's something really interesting
That
there.
was
I
very
agree.
deep, Dan.
I think those are all really good points. And I do, I do believe there's more to us than just like our thoughts, right? And it's important to know that. And I like to think of our brain and our body and our emotions and our nervous system as like an ecosystem. And so when things are out of balance, you've got to kind of look and go like, how do I add into the balance here? What is lacking? And we live in a cerebral culture, right? Where we've really pulled away from human touch. Like even like baby wearing is like not what it is in other cultures, and sleeping with children and just the way we are. Like, I don't know if it's Christianity. I think that's part of it. Like, just all of that stuff like that has been brought in over time. Like it's kind of wild. We've pulled so far away from it, and then we're trying to put it back together. And I do think and find like for us as adults, there's just a lot of history that we bring with us into our relationships and the way we are with touch. And for the most part, I find touch is less complicated for men than it is for women.
Mm.
And I'm sure there's science on that I don't
Yeah, I've
know.
never thought about it.
But I have certainly, as a woman, with my friends, with my clients, with everybody, I'm like, it's not unusual for a woman to feel touched out, for instance, especially if they're a mom. And so it's like a big thing when you're a new mom and you've got babies and they're always on you and not wanting anyone to touch you because you want that autonomy. It's just interesting, really. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I kind of like that it's interesting, it's open-ended. We're all experiencing these things differently. They're just conversations, and I think what we're all trying to do is just better figure out who we truly are and what works
Yeah.
for us, what doesn't, what feels good, what doesn't. And if it doesn't feel good, is that something we want to stay away from, or is it something we want to learn more about, observe, become aware, and then perhaps transform and change? And that's all individualized. There is no right or wrong, from my understanding of what you're saying. It's the beauty of the uniqueness of all 8 billion people here on this planet. I want
Yeah.
to get into a few of the terminologies that you're using and just ask you to go a little bit further into them, because you're talking about emotional regulation as well as nervous system regulation. You could help us understand. I mean, I think that we understand it, but just for the listeners, what those mean to you, and perhaps how you help your clients do that regulation for emotions and nervous system, or if it's the same.
Yeah, I think they're different. I'm sure everybody thinks about it differently. I'm not a scientist, so if somebody like wants to come at me for like
We'll
what
put
I
that
talk
as a
about with the nervous
disclaimer.
system, feel free. I never said I was. But for me, so emotional regulation, first of all, like I'll start there because I think people get really confused. Because when I talk about being emotionally regulated, they think that means that either they should always feel happy, and peaceful and okay, or they think that they should just not feel anything at all. And that's not what emotional regulation is. I personally think that emotional regulation is being open to the experience of all emotions and being able to navigate it in a way where you're not completely always falling apart. And sometimes you will fall apart because, let's face it, there are experiences where I think we would all agree that we want to not be okay. You know, somebody who you love dies, something horrible happens in the world. We want to have bad feelings about that. You know, like you want to feel better, but you don't. And that's just being open to being able to feel emotion is, I think, something that is a learned skill. And finding safety in feeling even extreme happiness can be hard for people, right? We live in a world where expressing emotion is considered to be horrible. Like, especially like you can laugh, but don't laugh too loud and don't cry at inappropriate times or like maybe at all. And definitely don't get so like fired up that you're yelling or anything like that, right? Like just be very waspish in your life.
That's a great way to put it, actually. I've never heard that. Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Kind of like what I was talking before. We're human. We literally have all of these senses to do that. And it's really so beautifully marries with what you were talking about. We've all lost touch with who we truly are. And I don't mean that on a, profession side, like labeling ourselves as parents or like friends or like our religious, affiliates or the countries that we're from. Like, no, not that. Like, if you remove all of those labels, the core of who we are, the essence of like our humanness, like these body suits, meat suits, whatever you like they're meant to touch and feel and like have, passionate rage of anger. Like that's a release of energy. Emotions are energy in motion. And like to hysterically cry and to hysterically laugh. Like I remember, like I was always called the perky child, like growing up, like because I was like super happy, and everybody would always ask me if I was a cheerleader. Now I do feel a part of this, and I've worked on that, was because I was masking like severe depression, and like I didn't want people to truly know that I was struggling and like just having really bad internal dialogue. But then even that, I was trying to overcompensate so people didn't know I was like crying inside, and then I was too happy. And I was like, well, where do I
Can't
go
win.
here?
Can't win. Well, we're as a society so dysregulated by other people's emotions because we think it's our job to fix them for people. And it's not. Like, you're allowed to have your emotional experience. I don't need to fix that for you. But as a society, you're right. We just don't have any capacity for it. And so it's not just like how you are, it is how society is. And can you fix society? I mean, arguably not really, but you can't decide what you're going to decide to believe about you. And so when I talk about emotional regulation, a big part of it is what you think about your emotions and what you think about showing emotion and the way that you experience them. I think that, probably even for yourself, like you get the feedback of like, you're too something, you're too emotional, you're too sad, you're too happy, you're too mad about this, you shouldn't be angry about this. And what happens is we start to have this inner dialogue of like, I shouldn't feel this way. And it's not just from like our people that we know, like that we're like heart to heart with. It's society as a whole. It's in the movies we watch. It's at school. Like it's so ingrained in us. And then when you start being able to not be able to cope, you just get diagnosed with a mental illness. I mean, that's what they do to you. You're sick. Sorry.
Yes.
You're eternally effed.
And again, no slight on doctors that are, then they'll prescribe you a drug and like hope you feel better.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, like they don't know. I don't, in my understanding, I don't believe they're taught these things in medical school or pharmacology school, whatever. It's that. But I'm hoping, and I'm perhaps I'm an optimist, hopeful for the future where more people are coming out and doing coaching and really trying to understand what it means to feel these things, to accept them, to say like, hey, there's a really sad commercial on the TV. I'm going to bawl my eyes out. Like if it makes you feel uncomfortable, like I can't help you with that. Like I don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, that's your problem. Like you're uncomfortable that I'm sad. Like I'm hurting literally nobody.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm crying. Who cares? But we care and we have that shame. And it always comes up when we cry. I mean, I cry when I've gone to my kids' things and started crying. And like, I'm a coach and I'm pretty practiced at allowing emotion, but it still brings up the shame if I'm crying in a space like that, even though like, why is it wrong to cry at your kid's performance? Like, it's fine.
Mm.
But we live in a society where it's really shunned. And so for me, like emotional regulation, a lot of it is like building the confidence in yourself to, first of all, experience emotion, but second of all, change the way you think about yourself, change the way you think about emotions, understand that there is an emotional buffet, that we actually experience all of it. We don't get to pick and choose the emotions we feel all the time. And emotion is something that passes through. It never lasts. It always passes through. You know, I've had a few new clients recently and they've come to calls and they've been beside themselves because they're experiencing the feeling of depression and they're like, well, I have chronic depression and and what the fear is they're going to go there and they're going to get stuck. That's what
Mm.
they're afraid of, right? That they are not going to be able to I've been in this hole and I couldn't get out. And I'm like, all of those thoughts are really messing with you right now because depression is just a feeling and it won't last. Even then, it didn't last forever. But the more you fight with it, the harder it'll hold.
Mm.
And, the more you tell yourself the story that even like when you say I'm chronically depressed, I'm like, how does that make you feel when you say that statement? It makes you feel terrible. It makes you feel hopeless. It makes you feel like you have no power. And I'm like, it's just a statement that doesn't have to be true.
Mm.
And, so for me, like emotional regulation is a better understanding of emotions, increasing your emotional vocabulary, getting yourself to a point where you understand how emotions feel in your body, and just really not pushing, but like pushing your brain to accept that how other people think about it is never going to work for you. Never.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just don't do
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. The acceptance of it, I think, is such a key word that you said there. It's allowing these emotions, being okay with them. And I think like what I'm hearing from you as an observation standpoint and something that I used for myself. And I've learned this from just different podcasts and docuseries that I've watched on like emotions and sciences and a lot of study on like language and the words that
Mhm.
we use. Because when you kind of like labels, kind of like as you started the show saying like when you label yourself as neurodivergent, it could be like really well to understand who you truly are, or it could be to a detriment to some people.
Mhm.
So for myself, I'll use anxiety because I used to experience anxiety a lot.
Mhm.
But I was very careful with the way that I worded that. Like I
Yeah.
experience anxiety. But if you were to ask me, even maybe 6 months or a year ago, I would say, I am an anxious person, or I
Mhm.
was an anxious person. And as soon as I put like the anxiety after the I am statement, it becomes that label, kind of like
Yeah.
I am a teacher or I am a mom. Again, nothing wrong with these things. This is how we identify and must kind of interact socially. And it's a way to understand it. But like, I am not anxiety. And
No.
how could I have it? It's not even here. Like it's just dialogue in my head. And as you're so beautifully talking about to your clients, like, okay, what are the thoughts going on? Like you're saying that you're depressed, or like you're saying you're anxious. Like what's the conversation going on in your head? Because it typically will pass at a point once that insane talk is dropped and the acceptance is there, which I believe from my own experience, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it, is just when I drop into that present moment.
Yeah.
Because what I've worked a lot on too, and I think what you talked about, like the depression states that I was in was something that was tied to my past, either that I didn't do or I was sad about, mad about, and it got me like so lethargic and so down. And then any of my anxious thought was trying to predict a future that hadn't happened from a past that had already informed me. And it's
Mhm.
just that monkey brain of constant analytical dialogue talk within this brain of mine.
Yeah. And like through no fault of your own. Like honestly, you look at like people talk about anxiety being this epidemic now and I'm like, well, yes, if we make anxiety a problem, it's a problem because we need to help people not believe all the shit we're sold over and over again, that you need to make X amount of dollars to be happy, that you need to have X career to be happy, that you need to have X kind of relationship to be in a satisfied life, that you need to have this much money saved to be able to retire, and you better retire when you're 55. And like, honestly, your kids should be like this. And if they're not, you've really screwed up. And like, who wouldn't feel anxious and depressed all at the same time?
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
wondering.
Yeah.
like,
This
shocker.
Yeah.
right? This comes back to that. It's like
Are
that
you going to
constant.
bring up the hugs again?
Yeah, let's just if we all just gave each other hugs. It comes back to that constant stream of information that we're all
Yeah.
like. It never ends, and there's constantly something coming in, constantly like you said, we're being told another thing that's wrong with us, another thing that we need, another thing that is going
Yes.
to happen in the future. But in the present moment, we very rarely have a problem.
True.
You
Like,
just
it's like you're
sit in
breathing.
silence. Yeah, exactly. Like, we're all safe, we're all breathing, we're all alive, and when you can really quiet everything, that's all there is.
Mhm.
And then we're alive and we're safe. And obviously, like, there's bills to pay and there's places we need to be, but we can stop for a second. And like you said, like being able to just like go into like some breath work for a second, and
Mhm.
just stop and be there and just be with yourself. And then all those problems go away. And it's when you come back into that race of life that they all come rushing back. So it's like learning how to be silent and be still and just be okay with being you.
That is the trick, right? But it's really hard for people. And, you know, you guys, it looks like you've been doing it for quite a long time. I've been doing it for quite a long time. I know how to do it. It is a skill.
Mhm.
And it isn't intrinsic. We don't know how to do it. And, you know, people, it's funny, even when you were saying about like, you're safe, I've seen clients use that against themselves. Like, I tell myself I'm safe and I'm still like doing it and there's something wrong with me. And I'm like, no. It's okay. Like, this is a practice. Like, when people talk about meditation being a practice, I'm like, so is like sitting outside and deciding that you're going to hear the birds. That's a
Mhm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you never do it because you don't see the value in it, or because it's not happening fast enough, like, I think that the payoff is huge. And you guys know that. And I know that. I'm like, when you talk about nervous system regulation, I'm like, all we're talking about is that when you are constantly in high stress, you are in fight, flight, freeze constantly. And your body starts normalizing that, and you have tons of cortisol, and it is just this like self-fulfilling, you know, shit show that you're in. And to get out of it, you have to work against how your brain is going to naturally work. And so it is hard. Like, don't pretend it's easy. It's not easy. It's hard to do this. Your brain's like, you better run away. And you're like, actually, I think we're safe. And it's like, no, you're not. No, we're going to sit right here. Oh my God, you better start moving. We're going to die. Like, that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, but once you start getting the practice of it, once you start realizing, like, okay, I feel really anxious this morning. This happened to me yesterday. And I was like, it's not like it goes away. Like, I do think that people think there's a place that you get to, and it's like some Zen place where you're a monk. And spoiler alert, it's just not there. You're still going to be you.
Mhm.
You're still going to have the same brain. You're still going to have the same intrusive thoughts all the time. It's just that you can start building practices that you know work. And so for me, it's like, I feel like shit. I feel super anxious. Everything feels like it's horrible. I've got black and white thinking like running rampant in my brain. Put on my hiking boots, walk out the door with my dog, go for a hike.
Mm.
Right. And then come
Yeah.
home and I'm like, okay, I now feel normal. Now I can see that a lot of these thoughts were not true. So
Yeah.
I can just continue on with my day. I'm fine. Everything's okay. And I frequently will have conversations with myself about, like, what if though? Like, what if financially everything fell apart? And I'm like, well, it would really suck, but I still would be okay. Like, I still know how to make money. I still know how to get by. I have family, I have friends. Like, it would not be awesome, but it also wouldn't be the end. And when you die, nobody's going to give a shit what you had
No.
at all.
Mm. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
It's so powerful. And I love that you share it.
Yeah.
Love that you share that anything can be a practice.
Yeah,
And it's like that idea, like it doesn't need to be this rigid
mm,
meditation practice. Going for a walk is something anybody can do. And it's such a powerful practice. And it's such a powerful way to kind of like a pattern interrupt, to get you out of that
Yes.
one train of thought and just kind of break the pattern, go do something else. And I like to share with people that anything that we do repeatedly is a practice. So
Yeah.
if you're conscious, if you're like
I was gonna say that.
constantly being anxious or constantly checking your emails over and over or
Mhm.
doing whatever else it is, then that is what you're practicing to become. But you
Yes.
can also just practice being that person that goes for a walk and clears their head and comes back and feels better about life.
Yeah.
Either one is a practice. It's just you get to choose what you want to practice to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna, you probably energetically took
Mhm.
that from me. No, I'm just kidding. Well, no, I was gonna, the practice, I also in our society today, everybody wants something done immediately. I
Mhm.
heard this quote, I was listening to it's like a Carl Jung podcast, like three Jungian philosophers like have this podcast, and one of the quotes that someone said was, everybody wants change without having to change.
Mhm.
And how do you change? It's practice. It literally, like, you've practiced for 30, 40, 50, 60 years
Mhm.
on the coping mechanisms to bring you to this place of what you thought society was going to be acceptable. And now you've shot your nervous system. You can't regulate your emotions. So it's just funny because we've convinced ourselves that it's wrong and that it's,
Yeah.
and then we form the identity around it. And then the ego freaks out because it's like, wait, you told me that this is how you wanted it to be, and now you're going to change it. But that's how powerful we are. I want to make sure that we're empowering people. That's how powerful you are. You've practiced your entire life how to be this one person. And if it's not working for you, like, that's all right. You can practice becoming someone else through all of the different observations, awarenesses,
Mhm.
tools that you're so beautifully sharing. And Amanda, I want to commend you too, because I feel like I absolutely love your vulnerability when you're talking about your human tendencies to get really stressed and really anxious. And as coaches, I don't know if you feel this way, but we certainly have, you're put on a pedestal and you're felt like, okay, nothing can go wrong. I have to present myself in this way. But that's also not helpful. There are really hard situations that all of us go through. So when you're talking about your life's experiences, whether it's
Mhm.
with your kids or work wise or just having something else going on, you're like, I'm freaking out. I need to go take a walk. I think that that's such a beautiful way to just embrace the humanness of who you are and the dedication to how you've changed, and that you do have these, um, you know, responses to that for your own self to get you back regulated in feeling whatever is best for yourself, or at least that's how I'm hearing it.
Yeah, I really believe in that. Like even, sometimes when I'm coaching a client, I'll just tell them to go watch Netflix. And a lot of people would like disagree with that, right? Like, oh, well, shouldn't they be journaling or like doing something like meditating? I'm like, sometimes when you are completely emotionally fried, watching a feel-good movie is actually going to be what you need in that moment. And there's nothing wrong with it, and everybody does it.
Mhm.
And maybe you don't watch TV, like there are people that don't, and I'm like, that's amazing, but most people do.
Yeah.
And so, if we can meet people where they're at and be like, yeah, sometimes I'm just like, I watch Ted Lasso because it makes me feel good. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I feel good now. And now I can continue with my day. I think that's better than going to bed and doom scrolling, or like going to bed and like letting your brain just tell you every single horrible thing that it wants to offer you and listening with rapt attention before, and then you're not sleeping and you're like freaking out in the middle of the night. I'm like, I believe in like kind of a concept of good, better, best. And I'm like, there are good things you can do that are going to be really good. And then there's going to be things that are better than the thing you're doing.
Mm.
Like,
Mhm.
so sometimes all we can do is better. I'm like, then do better. You
Yeah.
know, if you are wanting to listen to a podcast and you normally listen to business podcasts and you're an entrepreneur, and if you're like me and you like to listen to them because they kind of feel good, but then you want to buy shit, I'm like, then don't listen to those. Go find a different podcast that still gives you that same feeling, that isn't selling you anything and isn't telling you that you're doing it wrong. So like I started listening to Freakonomics and I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I'm learning all this new stuff. Nobody's selling me anything. I'm not constantly thinking I'm doing it wrong. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's
better.
great.
Test would be like sitting down and really like going through how much of an impact I've had with my clients and really like thinking about what do I want to do for these people and how can I help them? Like that would be best. But it's just there's a lot of nuance. And what I do find, I personally found for myself when I was like really struggling and I was in therapy and I was doing dialectical behavior therapy and I was like, oh my God, I'm a broken person and I need to like be on myself and fix myself. And it was overwhelming. I mean, I have it somewhere in here, the book they gave me for DBT. It's like an atlas.
Oh
And
gosh.
I probably people listening don't know what an atlas is. Like that's so sad.
That is sad. I hope
Like,
have
Yeah.
to.
It's a really
you'll
big
never
book.
know. You'll never understand going to the library and pulling out an atlas or an encyclopedia, like anything. Anyways, I digress. But it was like tool after tool after tool after tool. And I do think that that gets really overwhelming because it's like, well, what should I do? What's going to help? And it's like every single thing helps. And that's why I really think working with coaches is really beneficial because in the world of self-help, like it's a sea of information and it can be hard to pinpoint what's going to work for you. But if you're listening to this podcast, what I would say is like, take the simplest, easiest thing and just add it in. Like if it's going for a walk, go for a walk every day or as many days as you can and see if it helps. And if it does, keep doing it. And if it doesn't, find something else. Like that's what it is, right?
It's
Yeah,
literally
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
simple. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the coaching aspect.
Yeah,
because
that's how I named
yeah.
my coaching business Momentum
Yeah.
for that reason. It's like,
Yeah.
just do one thing, do something that helps. And then when you start to
Yeah.
feel better, you can do another thing. And then all of a sudden you start to feel good. And then you're excited to do more things. And it's like, oh, I want to try meditating or I want to do whatever it is because you started to build that momentum and you made good choices. And the more good choices you make, the more good choices you're going to make.
Yeah. And like you say, it's not because it's going to make you a better person. You're going to be the same person. You're already a perfect person. It's not, you're not a terrible person. You're just a person. And, you know, we all struggle and we all struggle. I do think like when people are like, life is so much easier now, I'm like, from a physical safety perspective, life is so much easier now. From a emotional and mental perspective, it's actually so much harder. And I think we do a disservice to people even saying like, oh, get off your phone. It's so addictive. Like, I mean, I even spoke to that with my kids, right? I do find it a little dysregulating, but I also recognize that like, it's the world we live in. And there is benefits to technology, like you two and I being able to get on this call and put a podcast out in the world. Like that's incredible. That is unbelievable.
Yes.
So helpful. And, you know, Instagram, like I will say, like I go on Instagram and I've learned, I'm like, first of all, you can train the algorithm to look for whatever you want. So if you search panda videos all the time, which I do, you will get a lot of panda videos. And pandas are like, they're like my spirit animal. I really identify with them. They're clumsy. They do stupid things. They get stuck. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
So I love watching panda videos. And I'm like, go watch panda videos. If you're going to go on the internet, go watch panda videos, go watch like, I don't care. Just watch stuff that isn't just you scrolling feed.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I'm obsessed with watching. Oh God, I don't even know how to say his name. I'm gonna butcher it. It's like Amar Gashan or something. He's like this famous chocolatier that builds like these insane like chocolate sculptures of like Ferris wheels and gorilla. And it's like I'll sit there like, Dan, can we watch this video? It's like only 3 minutes because it's on like that, but it just blew. And it's like, yes, I would literally like to sit here and watch it for an hour as opposed to just like liking things to like them so that like my friends know that I check Instagram.
Well, yeah, like, you know, when you look at that, it's just like, to me, I just think you can use any tool. So you can use social media to be regulating if you want to.
Yes.
And So that might be one of those choices where it's better, right? It's like, I shouldn't be on Instagram, but I'm going to be on Instagram. So if I'm going to go on Instagram, I'm going to search this specific thing so that I'm not looking at stuff and not being in control of like having to navigate all the thoughts and emotion that come up with everybody's stuff.
Yes. And I kind of like pointed this out a little bit when I said I'm cognizant of the way that I talk to myself now, just reframing different
Hmm.
phrases and the words that I use. And I love that you're beautifully kind of sharing people's internal dialogue, like in this conversation, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, or I should be doing this. And it's like, okay, should is a very, it's a very resisting, restrictive word. There's a lot of judgment of it, but also like, if you were to just put a question mark after every single one of the thoughts in your head, it lends itself to, is this true? And where is this thought coming from? Like, did I hear that I shouldn't be on social media, or did I hear that I should be doing this from some bodybuilder that like knows like, okay, his physiques, or some other holistic health coach that maybe it worked for him and his clients but not for me? So it lends itself to give more compassion to your own analytical mind and these thought forms that we pick up from society. Again, it's just the world reflecting back to us more opportunities for us to better understand ourselves. And like you so beautifully said, practice what feels good and what doesn't. And if you're doing things from that automatic standpoint of,
Hmm.
oh, my body just is kind of in the driver's seat and I'm just monotonously running these subconscious programs of my day-to-day life.
Yeah. And, you know, like we do live in a world where we don't give a lot of um, weight to rest. And we think about sleep, but we don't think about rest. And I'm like, sleep is a form of rest, but it's not the only rest. And, you know, you guys both look pretty fit and like you work out, like you probably take rest days. Like you need to rest your body and you need to rest your brain. And we don't know how to do that. And so we have to learn how, and it's hard. But the
Mm,
cool thing is when you learn how to do it, it feels really good.
yeah.
And then your life starts getting better.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, like when you guys talked about nervous system regulation and dropping into the body and sort of how we started this, that is mental and emotional rest. And mental and emotional rest can look a lot of different ways. And it can be tempting to think that you always have to be working your brain, and you don't. And there's
Mm,
so much value in resting your brain, and your brain is so much, it'll grow when you let it rest. It's just like muscles, like let them rest and they will grow. But if you don't let them rest, they won't grow. And so if you can think about it in that way and start believing in that process, and I think that's hard. It's hard. It's hard for people to wrap their head around doing nothing mentally.
mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
have a hard time with
I
it.
still struggle with it. Yeah. Again, the joy of being human. It's practice.
It is. And that's why I like using movement, going out in nature, going for walks, using your senses, like give your brain a job to do that's a lovely job, right? Just like,
Yeah.
just give it a nice job to do for
Yeah.
once. That's
Mhm.
still mental and emotional rest. But like, if there's anything you can do for yourself that is going to be the most beneficial, it's going to be that. Because, like you said, like being okay with being alone with yourself, that is the ticket of recognizing like I am okay just being me in this moment. Finding that place inside of yourself will change your life in the most amazing ways.
Oh my gosh, that
Mhm.
was so beautifully said. And I feel like such an embodiment of this whole conversation, what you've talked about. And I feel this fun, lighthearted energy that's emanating from you, but like the passion that you have for what you've gone through and experience. And I see that trickling over to you helping your clients. And I think that it's so wonderful. And as we wrap up, I kind of want to just talk about your coaching here, just so that people can get a little bit more familiar with it. And then of course we'll link whatever you'd like us to provide for websites and how people get in contact with you. And also you have your very own podcast, so please discuss that as well. But yeah, working with people, because I know you do it virtually too.
Yeah, I do
So kind
virtual
of
one-to-one
describe that
coaching
for us.
right now. So I work
Okay.
with my clients one-to-one. Anybody that was interested in coaching, I would always do a call with first, and we could just talk about, what you're looking for. On that call, we can just really get to know what you've been doing, what's been working, what hasn't been working, and we can break apart whether or not what I have to offer is something that would really help you, right? And then coaching is really just I love one-to-one coaching for the fact of it doesn't require a lot of outside effort on your client's part, right? You can just show up to the calls. That's all you have to do. Just show up to the calls and I will do the rest. It will be what actually creates the change. And I've just seen so many of my clients get through so many hard experiences, divorce, infidelity, the loss of a loved one, just really unpacking who they are and really understanding, what do I do next? Stopping drinking, all these things, right? And for me, in my coaching, that's what I'm really looking at, is just really helping people get what they want out of life and stop beating themselves up and start really loving themselves enough to be able to do things for themselves that work. And the magical output is that everything else starts to fall into place, right? As you guys know. So,
Who would have
that's what
thought?
I do for you would have thought, if you just work on those things, if you just get good with being you and just start doing things that are in alignment with your values and just really start understanding what makes you tick, that other things like your marriage will get better, your relationship with your kids will get better, your work will get better. You can improve all of those things through that. It's just, it feels almost like brainwashing, but it isn't, as you know. So
It's like unbrainwashing yourself.
I'm unbrainwashing you. I like that. That's good. Yes.
And I feel it's so beautiful, and I love it because I think probably halfway through the podcast you said we've talked a lot about society, the conditioning, the programs, the social media, the movies, everything in this life that we're taking on as humans in the world right now, and it's really overwhelming. And it's like, can we change society? No, but we can transform ourselves. And that transformation is going to change. Imagine if everybody transformed itself. That's how society changes. I mean, we're that powerful at an individual level that's going to ripple out into the people in our family, our friends, our communities, the states, the provinces, the countries in the world. I think it starts micro and then goes out macro. And I think that it's beautiful what you're doing, and it's so much in alignment with our values and philosophies on life. So that's wonderful. Amanda, where can people find you? And please, I would love for you to talk about your own podcast too, really quickly, so people can tune into that as well.
Yeah. So my podcast is called How to Love Yourself No Matter What. I've had it for 4.5 years now.
Oh, wow, long time. Okay.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I love it. It's mostly solo episodes on my podcast. That seems to be what my audience prefers. And if you're looking for, if this podcast, if listening to this really resonated for you, I definitely recommend going on there. I think I have 215 episodes or something crazy like that. So there's a little something for everybody in there. I know I've spoken to several women who just find it really helpful for them. Even if coaching is something that isn't available to you, they listen to my podcast every day and they find it really helpful. So that's my podcast. And if you want to follow me, you can just find me on Instagram. It's the Amanda Hess, or you can find my website. It's amandahess.ca. So those are the places you can find me. I'm always open to DMs and conversations. If you have questions about what we've shared, or you just want to talk about it, definitely DM me, because I really am an open book. I think that's the one thing that I try to be as much as possible. I don't feel like I'm better than anybody, or oh, I figured it out and you haven't. It's just not like that. Life is hard, but let's make it a lot less hard for you so that you can actually enjoy it, And so every day doesn't feel like a battle.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So beautifully said. I mean, this conversation was just warmed my heart in so many ways. I thank you very much, like I said, for being vulnerable, for sharing, for uplifting and empowering. And yeah, we're all in this together. Let's make life a little bit easier, as you said. Oh, thank you, Amanda Hess, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. You guys are both wonderful, and I really appreciate it.